As Gen AI reshapes industries, understanding and leveraging its capabilities is no longer an option, it's a necessity. And that's exactly why at HatchWorks, we developed our Gen AI Innovation Workshop. In this workshop, we immerse you into a full day of learning, hands-on ideation, and building. We hit foundational concepts and show you how they relate to your domain. Then we develop actual use cases for your business and your industry. And we even build a custom GPT based on the use cases we define. Check out the link in the show notes or visit hatchworks.com to get started today. Welcome to Built Right, a podcast by HatchWorks where we help you learn how to build the right digital product the right way. In this season, we're going all in on generative AI, with guests ranging from international AI speakers, founders of Gen AI products, experts in specific domains of Gen AI, and leaders across industries. We're here to help you figure out how to take advantage of this new emerging technology so you can win in the market. So whether you're an AI techie or just AI curious, we got you covered. Let's get into it. Hey, Built Right listeners, we have a special edition of the Built Right podcast for you today. In this episode, you'll get the unique opportunity to hear from HatchWorks CEO Brandon Powell and HatchWorks new Executive Chairman and former CEO of Carta, J Schwan. And they're going to be discussing the future of software development in the age of generative AI. I've listened to this episode and I promise you're in for a treat. These are the type of conversations and insights you just really won't get anywhere else.
Welcome to a special edition of the Built Right podcast. I'm Brandon Powell, the CEO of HatchWorks, stepping in as your host today. Joining me today is our new Executive Chairman of HatchWorks, J Schwan. Jay has over 25 years of founding and scaling global digital consultancies, including Solstice and Carta, and now runs the Second Mountain, an early-stage investment fund focused on technology services companies. He's an engineer by trade and absolutely one of the best strategic thinkers I've ever seen. Together, we're going to dig into the massive impact of generative AI on software development, exploring both the challenges and the incredible opportunities it presents. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Thanks, Brandon. Good to talk with you, as always.
Great. So I'm really looking forward into digging into today's topic. HatchWorks has been really going all in since AI came out, or generative AI came out. And we would love to understand from you, what you're seeing and what is it about generative AI coming from an engineer's perspective that you see as such a disruption to the market?
Look, by no means am I the most astute technical expert on this topic, but I'll kind of break it down into, I guess, the layman's way that I think about it. And that is, like, historically, a lot of the AI that has been put into practice in the business world has been declarative in the sense that, you know what you're going to get out of it. It's still using statistical models under the hood, but there's been like a pretty distinct set of rules and guidelines in terms of, like, if you put this in, you're going to get an answer coming out that's going to be in this format. And, and it's going to be based on predictions, and it's going to be based on training data and a lot of things that are similar to generative AI, but you kind of know what you're going to get. And with generative, it's almost the opposite. You don't necessarily know what you're going to get. It's creating content. Generative is creating content for us in multiple different forms based on the training data that we give it, but we're not really sure what's going to come out the other side of a question that we put in. And I think that's kind of fascinating. That opens up, a significant more number of use cases than, the typical kind of machine learning declarative types of AI that we've used. And that's why it's so disruptive, because, there's a lot we can do with it now, but there's also this sense that, we're just at the tip of the iceberg of what's possible with generative AI, and no one is, including the ones that are building it, are quite sure where it's all going to go. But it's clear that it's going to have tremendous value, and it's going to be very, very disruptive. So, I think that's both, a little bit scary and also fascinating and interesting. And I think that's why you're seeing such a huge investment going into the space right now.
Yeah, and I know from my, my background is more on the product side, where you come from the engineering side. I come from the product side, and I also think one of the things that's interesting is the accessibility of it. Soon it was almost like it's been around. AI has been around for 60 plus years, right? And computes continued to get better. The hardware, all those pieces have gotten better, but it's like all they did was launch an interface to it, right? ChatGPT, and it just exploded. Right. I think it got to 1 million users or something in 5 days. But what's your perspective there too around it's democratizing things. It's becoming more available for people like me. I'm not an AI, I'm not a developer even, but as soon as it launched, it was like you said earlier, it's like I can ask it whatever I want. I can talk to it. I can have a conversation. Whereas before it was like, how do I really get access to this data that's there?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, I think the chat interface that I think we associate with it today. And I do, I would add that I think that's just the first step in terms of the type of interfaces we're going to see. But it's, a conversational interface is immediate. There's no training that you need to do to learn how to use it. So I thought it was really smart that, OpenAI said, hey, this is how we're going to expose this technology to the world, and went kind of consumer first, with the deployment of their kind of transformer models. I thought that was brilliant. And yeah, and, for everyone from my 7-year-old kid to my mom is using ChatGPT to get information and answer questions now.
Yeah, my mom she's 67 years old, constantly asking, like, where can I take some more training courses on it? And I'm like, I think she was a COBOL programmer. Many.
Oh yeah, awesome.
And it's awesome. So one of the things that I was thinking about is as we go to this almost new phase, even though AI has been around a long time, it feels like we're making a pretty another one of these big seismic industrial shift, kind of this shift where it's like a new platform. And how do you've been around through a couple of these shifts, including cloud and mobile. So how would you really compare this disruption to things like the internet or mobile, personal computer that you've seen?
Yeah. I mean, it's a secular cycle. It's very, very similar. And I think that's what makes me so excited about it. I mean, I started my career kind of as the kind of the internet cycle was peaking, and a lot of the infrastructure was getting built out and platforms were emerging. And I kind of started a career on some of those early Web 1.0 kind of technology stacks, and, just saw how transformative that was. And then kind of midway through building Solstice, the mobile wave hit, and it followed a very similar platform. You had kind of hardware infrastructure that got built out. And in that case, it was really the mobile networks was the hardware infrastructure that got built out for mobile, or that was needed. And then these platforms kind of merged on top of them. Things like the App Store for the iPhone, for example, and then apps all of a sudden started to get created on top of those platforms. And then I think what I would consider to be the true creative resources started to be developed, meaning mobile native applications, or applications that really only could exist on that platform, because they were location aware, contextually aware. They used all the capabilities of these new platforms that, you couldn't traditionally do on the internet. So if you think about what's going on today, it's following a very similar cycle, and we are in the hardware kind of infrastructure building phase. I mean, that's why you see NVIDIA and all these chip makers, and it's they're making tons of money because everyone's building out their data centers and building out their AI capabilities within the data centers, and the hyperscalers building them out in the cloud. So it's foundational. This is just the beginning. And I think that's what's really exciting. We haven't really seen platforms emerge yet, in my opinion. I mean, there's some that are kind of emerging out there, but most of them are kind of these closed wall APIs within, some of these different models. But true standardization and open platforms that everyone can say, yeah, this is how you build generative apps, we're still not even there yet. And so super early. And then after that, we'll get apps built on the platforms, and then we'll get those creative, true generative AI native use cases that frankly, many of us haven't even considered or thought of yet. And so that all is to come. And that's, to me, is what's so exciting about this. I mean, it's so similar to what we saw on the internet and mobile days and that's why there's just so much, I think, fanaticism and kind of franticness right now, because everyone knows it's coming, but no one quite knows what it's going to look like yet.
Yeah, and maybe this is the $1 million question, but I think you're seeing the parallels between how you navigated Solstice into mobile, super successful at scaling there. And you're saying, right now we're more in that hardware / infrastructure, everything's there. So the ingredients are all there. Now our next step is the platform phase and the applications on top of that. Do you have any predictions or some early winners that you see there in that platform stage now that we're kind of starting to move into that area?
In terms of emerging platforms, I think it's super early. I think open source is going to win. So I think the closed models are going to struggle to keep up with the open source frameworks, and Meta's kind of committed to open sourcing the models that they're creating, and them demonstrating that they can kind of keep pace with these closed models coming out of like OpenAI and Anthropic, for example, kind of shows that the models themselves are going to get commoditized. So the platforms in which those models run, I think those are just getting built out now. Like, who's going to win there? It's hard to say. Every hyperscaler is going to have their own solution to that. I think there's going to be an open source platform that most likely emerges. You're seeing things like Hugging Face and LangChain like offer different capabilities and marketplaces that are a bit more open. I think those are definitely things to watch. But where are we going to be building these kind of generative native apps? I honestly don't think that the final resting place has been determined. The final standard has been determined yet. I don't think anyone's actually solved that. I think we'll probably see some early signs of it in later this year, and it'll start to become a little bit clearer with how fast everything's moving. But I don't think anyone can claim to be winning there quite yet.
No, I completely agree. I thought the Meta one was just the most interesting, because if you think about Microsoft and Amazon and their partnerships, their investment, right? They're all about driving usage on their infrastructure layer, right? That's essentially like, I want you in my infrastructure and drive uses. And many of these models are very expensive that came out there, that came out to market first. I thought the Meta was just really interesting. When you come to the game with a completely free open source model, it really kind of puts things a little bit in check. And also, you think about Meta, they're not an infrastructure company. So what's driving them in that space? Data, it's input. It's the ability to get more data into their platform and product. And I just think it's really compelling right now, the different strategies. But I'm with you that I think the LLMs all end up being a kind of a commodity, like choosing your infrastructure type. But they've all got these different strategies around why they're doing it. And it'll be really interesting to see who wins. But shifting gears a little bit, as we look at, software engineer, right? So we've been in this software development space for over 7 years now. And, we've seen some decent pivots, right? We went from on-prem to cloud, and, we started putting DevOps and automation, all these pieces into software. But, coming from that engineering background, people are always saying that this is the area that's going to have a huge amount of impact in terms of developers and actually creating code. Why do you think that is?
I think it's getting a lot of attention right now because as software engineers, most of what we do is text-based. And so, the generative, the most capable models right now are outputting text. They're taking in a lot of text and they're outputting text. And so fields that, are input, take a lot of text as input, professional fields or careers that take a lot of text as input, and then produce a lot of text as output. I mean, those are the ones that are going to be able to take advantage of this technology first. So things like writing and journalism, things like legal, and contracts, things like finance and in software. So I think it's more about greatly increasing the capabilities of one individual with this technology. I don't think writers are going to go away. I don't think lawyers are going to go away. Fortunately, no. Kidding.
I remember too.
Finance people aren't going to go away. Software engineers are not going to go away. Yeah, I mean, I remember dating myself a bit, but like my first project out of college, I was working at a mutual fund company, and I was coding in VI, which is a green screen based text editor. That's how we were programming for this particular project. And like IDEs, like integrated development environments, which is, kind of like the Windows-based applications that people use to write code and introduce debuggers and things like that. Those were just kind of starting to get traction. And as they were coming out with these IDEs, people were like, oh, we're not going to need as many software engineers because now these IDEs are going to make it so much easier to find bugs and to write code quickly. And it's got all this autocomplete capabilities and blah, blah, blah. And, I look back to the 90s versus today, and there's probably 1,000 times as many software engineers as there was back then. So, what I think's probably going to happen here is we're just going to greatly increase the capacity or productivity of these different kind of text-based disciplines, including software engineers, which is going to make it much cheaper to write software, which is going to allow a lot more software to be written. Things that were not financially viable, even 3 or 4 years ago to do are now going to be financially viable from a project perspective or a capital allocation perspective. And that's incredibly interesting, I think.
Yeah. So and this is the kind of there's two sides to this, right? Is one, some people believe, okay, software development, that's going to kind of go away. There's other people that's like, yeah, I'm in the same quarter as you, that, yeah, I think it's going to drive better productivity, better efficiency. You still have to understand how to code, how the application is built, but it's going to draw more people into the pool. The pool being more people that are willing to spend on building software and building applications, because you're essentially, from my perspective, at least, lowering the barrier to entry. And now you've got access where it isn't going to cost you the same to build or maintain or run that application. I get asked that all the time because I feel like there's a lot of noise in the market. No, don't let your kids go be a developer. They need to go do this these days. And so I think, speaking directly to kind of that developer that's out there in that community, do you believe that Gen AI will replace the role of the software engineer at some point?
Yeah, I don't. I think the role is going to change dramatically, just as it has changed dramatically over the last 70 years. But I don't think it's going to eliminate it, because at the end of the day, what software engineers do is, they kind of they're like the human interface that exists between a business problem and the machine that solves it. And, I think there's a real value exchange that happens there. There's a lot of considerations in terms of like how things get done. So I think like a lot of the lower level tasks are going to get automated. They're going to become easier, just as they have been getting automated and getting easier over the last, 20 years of IDEs and all these other capabilities. But the foundational element of having an engineer, a true like problem solver, someone that knows how to take the science and apply it to a specific, world or business problem, that role is still going to be necessary. And I also think there's got to be new roles, just as, back in the mainframe days, there was one role. It was a mainframe developer, that was it. And as like architectures got more complicated and, you started getting tiers of capabilities like data tiers and server-side or middleware tiers and front-end tiers, and you started to get these specializations at these different tiers. So I do think new specializations are going to emerge coming out of this, new type of software system, new generative software system. I don't think it's going to be prompt engineers. I think it reminds me of like when Google started getting popular, you could go buy a book on like how to Google, like like it was like you could use these like symbols for ands and ors and stuff, and people. I mean, it just reminds me of that. I think I don't see that as a discipline as much as harnessing kind of the data that exists behind these firewalls, putting them in a model that's efficient, that's purpose-built, that's inexpensive, that's fast. That is going to be a discipline and a skill set in and of itself. And others like it that will emerge that did not exist 3 or 4 years ago, in addition to like what we consider to be like a traditional full stack software engineer.
Any predictions on what some of those new roles might be? One that I think I have the wrong name for it, but I am so aligned with the fact that engineers solve business problems, and the how will shift. I loved how you stated like the how will shift, and it's shifted even over the last couple of decades. This idea of like an AI, I know this is the wrong word, like an orchestrator, like kind of like there's all these tools out there. There's all these different, sets that they can make, but they're still got this business problem, and they've got to figure out from this toolkit, what are the things that I'm going to use to solve this problem? And it might be a lot less of writing just a bunch of code versus like, I have this I can pull from, that guy can pull from. I mean, we have libraries today, but just like what's a role or an example maybe that you see popping up out of this new era?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not too dissimilar. Like, software engineers they access different frameworks and libraries and APIs today to get stuff done. So add a class of capabilities called agents to that mix. And agents are going to be able to do multi-step processes versus like what we consider of just like a method where you put, instantiate a class, call a method, put data in, get data out. Agents may have the capabilities of doing multiple things, with multiple different types of input over time. But I do think it's going to be similar in that, like, there's just going to be a new class of tools available to a software engineer to use for specific types of applications. And so that's why I don't see the role, going away. I just see it getting more powerful because the tools available to it are going to be much more vast and are going to increase the productivity and capabilities tremendously.
Yeah, let's double click on the agent piece of this, because that's something I give a lot of thought about. And it's somewhat difficult for me coming from more the product side, but like the idea you mentioned that maybe some of these more junior roles go away, or these lower level tasks that maybe you're doing offshore, doing somewhere differently. We saw Devin that launch, right? Kind of that idea as a software agent. Mixed reviews on the success of Devin there. Yeah, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about like if we had a team, right? And today in out of this agile world, you put your pod out there, and most of those roles, you've got defined roles. But I feel like in the future, like this idea of having this agent that's part of your team, like this is Hatchy. He's part of this team, and he or she does these tasks. But any perspective or view on the role of agents? Because I believe that agents are going to continue to get built. We're going to get to more of this agents talking to agents and go from there. It's just in this space of software development where it is quite complicated. There is a lot of things that can be automated. But what do you have a vision or perspective on the role of agents specifically within software development?
Yeah, so I don't think there's going to be like this one super agent that we go to ask to do about everything. I'm much more of the mindset that it's going to be more componentized, like we think about frameworks today or libraries that we would include in a software project. You're going to have these agents that have a specific set of capabilities that are trained on a specific set of data. They understand a specific set of processes. And can make decisions and perform those things. So, and some of these may be publicly available that everybody uses, in the hyperscalers clouds, and most of them I think are going to be very specific to a company or an organization. So, and I think it'll be more modeled after like how you think about roles in an organization today. So, you know, you could have an agent for Workday that can do certain HR processes, but more likely you're going to have an HR agent that's very specific to a company and how they enact their HR policies and processes, because every company is going to be a little bit different. So you would have these agents that would be performing different roles within an organization. And this is where you're going to get hyper productivity gains, because it's not just going to be embedded in, it's like, it'll be everywhere. And so you'll have all these agents in all these different departments that are very specific to how a company wants to run its business. And the developer will be able to tap into these different agents for different things, depending on what it is that they're trying to do. Onboard a new customer, run some particular types of reporting, or, fulfill an order today. So not dramatically different to how we think about APIs, but just much more powerful, much more intelligent in terms of their ability to make decisions, and much more encapsulated in terms of like running overarching processes and not just, individual kind of calls. So I think like your point about the engineer as an orchestrator, I would argue they already are orchestrators. They're just now going to be that much more powerful with this new class of tools called agents on top of these other tools that they have had, like libraries and frameworks and APIs, and will continue to use.
And I was thinking too that, these large hyperscalers, right? You pick them, even like a Salesforce, for example, they're very incentivized to build agents that can build software to build, basically build capacity on their platform, right? The faster you can build an application, the faster you're going to consume, right? And so that's one of the thoughts is like, yeah, there'll be these like open agents that you can use like on an AWS to help you build the application quickly. And so it got me to thinking, it's like, how do you think about organizations? Like, how do they differentiate? Do you think that, companies like HatchWorks and other, even big organizations that are in a space, do you think that will build IP into their agents, and that'll be one of the ways that they're able to differentiate from their competitors?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be a whole lot different than it is today in that vein. So, for example, like Zappos is known for having phenomenal customer service. I would argue it's not as great as it used to be. I mean, it used to be amazing before, and not that Amazon screwed it up, but it's like, but it's a great example though of a company that was just like hyper focused on it. And they're, and that goes through like everything from, order fulfillment and returns and, and your ability to shop and all these things and recommendations. And I think that like, the companies that are very, very focused on providing a fantastic customer experience that goes above and beyond what other, whatever the industry standard is, will invest accordingly. And their agents are going to be very specific to them and much more capable and much more intelligent, and offer a source of differentiation for that end customer experience. And so this is why, I was talking with the CIO the other day who was like kind of just coming up to speed, on some of these generative capabilities. And they were like, we're partners with Salesforce and Microsoft. And I'm just thinking like, they'll give us whatever we need to do, to do this, to use this stuff. Like, I don't need to go build something, I'm fine with just waiting to take whatever they give me. And I won't say what the company was, but looking at the company, I'm like, that makes sense for you, because, the experience that you're offering today is not necessarily unique. It's just enough to meet customers' expectations in terms of what they need. And that's not the source of differentiation you're looking to build. And so some companies, it's going to be fine. Like, hey, whatever the stock, capabilities of the ERP system are, that's enough for me. There's going to be other companies that are going to say, you know what? I see an opportunity to differentiate utilizing these next set of technologies, just as they had perhaps with the internet and mobile and other things. And I am going to build some differentiating capabilities to allow me to really create a distinct, whether it's experience or hyper efficiency in the back office, or whatever their kind of strategic goals or points of differentiation are, and they'll invest accordingly. So I don't think it'll be much different than, you have those digital leaders today. They'll use this as the next platform to do it on. And the ones that are laggards, are happy to be laggards, or are okay being laggards, will continue to be. And they'll use, this, whatever the standard kind of baseline tooling is.
No, that's great perspective. What do you think, with AI, right? Been around a long time, but what do you think, we're going to have, AI is going to struggle with versus what it's going to, do really well at? I mean, I think, there's a lot of hype out there, obviously, but there really is some great, we've seen some really big gains at HatchWorks and some of the things that we've been doing. We've also seen some things that don't work really well. But let's think about the longer term game here. Where do you think AI is going to have the most success, and where do you think it may never solve the problem that we're looking at?
I don't know. I mean, when you ask that question, what are some things that come to your mind in terms of limitations that you're seeing today?
Yeah. So I think in general, today, there's a cost factor, period. Right. I mean, that's going to go down, but there is definitely it's a pay to play type of platform. Right. And when you start looking at significant volume on these platforms, it gets very expensive. You also have issues with hallucinations. You've seen stuff in the media out there where, some of these, I don't believe that personally. I don't believe that the large LLMs are going to be the answer. I think there's going to be, small language models, models specific to certain things. Like, it's like we're getting a Ferrari right now, and that's all we need is to take the bus from one stop to the other. And there's going to be more options out there, but they're all very, very expensive right now in terms of what you actually need to do the job. And so I think that over time that you're going to get very specific models. You mentioned the Zappos example earlier. There's going to be a model, specifically for retail, and it's a set of things. And then from there, Zappos can go and bring their data to the table, and they can customize and train that model to be in some companies, or even who have the money and the scale, maybe even go build their own model because they see that as a key differentiator and a special sauce for them. But I think in general, I think AI can solve a lot of problems. I think coming from my side, more from the product's perspective, I'm concerned that engineers will think that they don't actually have to learn how to build software. So it's not necessarily a technology issue as much as it is like, hey, I actually never knew how to debug software. I've always just depended on AI to do it my whole life. And then you take you get hallucination and stuff like you get today. You can't take everything as like the answer, the one, it's 100% correct. You still need a human to kind of look at it, make sure that makes sense. And I think I've saw some data around how long it takes to debug things now, that it's taking longer to debug because I think you have people using AI to build things that don't actually know how to do it. And so they're back and it's taking them longer to figure out the problem. So, again, I'm not coming from an engineering side, but I think that anytime there's a great technology, it's like, oh, well, I'll use AI for this, I'll use AI for that. But if you just recklessly use it without actually understanding the problem that you're solving, and then the ability, I think, to reverse engineer what you're doing to validate that you solved it the right way, that's one of the problems I'm seeing today in terms of the technology.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really smart. So I guess taking both parts of that argument. So one, on the cost side, it's not unlike the cloud. It's like just because the cloud's there and you move something to the cloud doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be cheaper to run it there. And I think a lot of companies realize that. And so if you're not building the system to be cloud native, then there's a potential that you're using way more resources than you otherwise would need to. And it's going to become a lot more expensive to run that application. I don't think I don't think these generative systems are going to be any different in that regard. Also, like something else you touched on around data, the open or closed, they're all pretty much being trained on the same data sets, and meaning they've scraped the whole internet. Like they've pretty much done it at this point. Like they've scraped the whole internet, they put them into these models. So all the public data is kind of in there. But there's a massive amount of private data that is not in there, right? That companies own and kind of have walled off, and they're not going to want that data in there. And so this is where it opens up the opportunity to create, I think, very bespoke, purpose-built small language models that are specific to a company, which will then in turn, evolve into these agents we talked about earlier. And so there's a lot of opportunity and work to be done there, to leverage companies' individual data to create very bespoke, either new models or models that are trained on their specific data. So I agree with you. I think that's like a tremendous body of work that needs to be done to really unlock it. And then from the software engineer's perspective, I saw some of the same stats. Like generally everyone's saying it seems to be like leveling off at 30% productivity gains with what we have today. I mean, to be a third faster. I think that'll continue to increase. But debugging is it's taking longer to fix bugs because people don't necessarily know what that 30% is doing. And that's not good. I mean, I think that's, it's like an editor for a magazine not reading an article before he publishes it. Like he would never do that, And so I think there needs to be some training done for software engineers before things are just taken and put into production without quite understanding those things. And so this is where the role will continue to evolve.
So you mentioned earlier around, data models, completely agree. I think that, companies are going to work to build moats around their data. They're going to try to leverage their data in really ways that they haven't done it before. Can you talk a little bit in business models? Like I know with SaaS, and then of course, we've been in the services business a long time, and in services, specifically in consulting and development, obviously a lot of it has been based off time and material, fixed hourly, monthly. What do you see as the impact from Gen AI on some of these business models?
Well, I think it's two-sided coin. So one, I think, part of the reason why SaaS multiples are down is because it's going to get cheaper to build software. And so the value of software is these software multiples are decreasing because you could arguably build it in some cases for as much as it would cost you to buy it. And that hasn't always been the case. So I think the build versus buy equation is going to change. And so a lot of companies saying, well, instead of buying this thing and then spending a bunch of money customizing it, will it be cheaper for me to just build it for bespoke for us? And I think more and more say, yeah, it actually does make more sense for us to just build this for us and just manage it, maintain it ourselves instead of, paying these exorbitant licensing fees for these different SaaS tools. So I think that's going to, this is where I think the demand for software will increase. Software development will increase, similar to like what I was saying when the IDEs came out. And everyone was like, oh, you're not going to use me as software engineers to be more productive. Well, no, what happened? We built more software because it was easier and cheaper to build. Well, same thing's going to happen here. So I think that is interesting for services. The second side of it is, things are going to get more predictable. And when they get more predictable, you can fix the cost of them. And when you can fix the cost of them, you could obviously think about utilization in different ways. So those scenarios, that I think remains to be seen. 30% isn't enough to completely disrupt the industry, but assuming that trajectory continues, I think you'll start to see more and more predictability changing that dynamic. And so the nimble firms like ours are going to have, I think, an advantage over the big, heavy incumbents that, have a lot of mouths to feed. So I think that's exciting,
Yeah, I'm super excited too, because I think for customers, like to be able to put skin in the game and be outcome focused, which is what we love to do. I think AI enables us to do that. And, if you're paying by the month or by the hour for a big team, it allows someone like us to come in and like, look, I'll build the team and I'll use my technology on the AI side, of course, making sure risk and all that's in control. And we're going to deliver an outcome for you. And we can do it with a smaller team and everyone lined up in the same time zone and get it done. And so I'm very excited. I would also was thinking on the SaaS side, it can take a long time just to get an MVP out to market. And if someone sees a great idea, you can catch them and pass them before they even have a chance to patent something, right? I mean, like that's how, it used to be like, wow, man, that's a great idea. I wish I could would have thought of that. But now I also think that it's going to be interesting on the SaaS side because people are going to see something and think, wow, wait, I can get that to market in weeks, not months sometimes. And what happens there in that market. So
and build it in a way that's very specific to one organization or, their take on how to actually make that even better, that leverages their unique capabilities or their unique positioning. I agree. If you look at some of the licensing fees that clients are paying for these large SaaS vendors now for just basic, input output type stuff. I mean, it's insane, and I think that's really we're going to be the biggest source of disruption.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's some things like where you pay you're using one module, you're paying for this entire platform. You could build that module and now it's not going to cost you, you're paying $1 million in licensing. You can go build it for a fraction of that and run it and support it and
make it work exactly the way you want it to for your organization.
Build that moat around your data. I think it's going to be very interesting in that space. And I know as we kind of wind down here, talk to someone. There's thousands and thousands of engineers out there, people in school thinking about being a software engineer. What advice or any would you give to a software engineer, maybe looking at development, even DevOps, cloud, any of these spaces where the whole world's kind of changing a bit with AI, regardless of what your specific role is within the organization?
Yeah. Well, I think the opportunities are going to expand, not contract in the fields of computer science. I think anytime we've had these step changes, that's been the case. I don't think this will be any different. So, I disagree with some of the quote unquote thought leaders saying, like, you don't need to learn to code anymore. We'll take care of it for you. Like, no thanks. I don't want to put, the future of computing in the hands of one company. We need this to be democratized. We need people to be involved in the open source projects. We need to be developing these capabilities out in the open so they can be, regulated by a community. Governments are going to put in their own set of standards. But I think, it's important that engineers become even more T-shaped. So they're willing to kind of broaden themselves out in terms of the different types of capabilities that are involved in software engineering, but also find that area of specialization that they want to go really deep in and be one of the best in the world at. And I think that will continue to be valuable. And you have to be intentional about that. You have to be very clear about where, what is that area that you really want to focus on, that you think has long-term potential. You understand kind of the trajectory of that discipline or skill set or career path. But be intentional about it. And be nimble and be willing to pivot.
And I think last question, I think that you mentioned earlier, you talked to a CIO and you were talking, this came up with Gen AI. I talked to a lot of CIOs and CTOs as well. And personally, I feel bad for them because there's so much noise out there. There's so much, all vendors talking to them about Gen AI, all the platforms talking about Gen AI, it's everywhere. And so if you put yourself in kind of our customer's shoes, what would you tell them in terms of trying to figure out what's hype, since we're right in the middle of the hype cycle for AI and we both know and believe this is real? It's just kind of, there's a lot of hype there and you have to look at what's real. What advice would you give to be able to figure out like what's real from hype?
I mean, I think there's a level of experimentation that's necessary at this phase because it's early. There's this old saying in tech that you're early, you're late. So you got to choose if you're going to be early or late. Either one's fine, but to pretend like you're going to time it perfectly in the middle, I don't know. It's easier said than done. So, and if you choose to be early, which I've got a bias towards, obviously, because I've been a technologist my whole career and I've seen it shape and transform industries. But if you choose to be early, I would think about where the real value drivers are in your business. and look at what the potential for these generative AI technologies are in that vein. Don't do some little silly side thing that like, that's kind of generic and not really going to move the needle for the business, just to prove that you could do a project using these technologies. How you're viewed differently in your competitors, and how could you apply this technology to those specific capabilities or use cases? And that's where I would try to experiment, because I think you have the chance of extracting a lot of value very quickly, and getting, and potentially getting a big leap ahead. So that would be my suggestion in terms of how you think about framing these initial few kind of quarters. Or you just wait and see what Microsoft and Salesforce are going to give you and plug it in when it's ready, and and just be late, and that's fine too. I mean, it just depends where your priorities are.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Well, Jay, I really appreciate you joining us today on the Built Right podcast. Is there anything else you want to leave us with?
No, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you, Brandon, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you.
Thanks for listening to Built Right. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. For more info on Built Right, visit us at hatchworksbuiltright.com. Do you already have a Gen AI use case in mind for your business, but don't know where to get started? HatchWorks Gen AI Accelerator is exactly what you need. We guide you from ideation to a tangible prototype. Our approach provides a low-risk, high-value pathway for you to validate and test Gen AI technology on a small scale before committing to full production. We take you through technology and LLM selection, perform data preparation, and then build the actual prototype. And then we do testing and model fine-tuning of your prototype. The best part is, we get you to this prototype in just 2 to 8 weeks based on the scope of your use case. Check out the link in the show notes or visit hatchworks.com to get started today.